We're here joined with Nick Thompson, National Partner Director at Shopify Plus, and Ashley Scorpio, Vice President, Overlord of Partnerships at HawkeMedia. Well, I should say I'll just take a moment to plug our friend Alex Glenn at partnerprograms.io. He's actually who put Ashley and I together, put us in touch as I was trying to round out the roster for this event. And then in the course of talking about the event, we've maybe come up with some ways that we might be able to work together in the future. So big shout out to Alex Glenn over at partnerprograms.io. He's doing great work over there. And so thanks, Alex, and thanks Ashley and Nick for being here. As I was saying in our my sort of prefatory remarks, we're here to debate the primacy of brand versus product. Who is on first? And if I, the merchant, in trying to develop my business, want to allocate the most time and resources in the early stages, is there one or the other, or is it a sort of a dialectic between where they're sort of helping to develop one another? These are all the things that we can sort of get at. I'd like to throw to the room, before I allow the two to make your own sort of introductory remarks, is to just give a couple quotes to sort of frame the conversation and the debate today. And it, I think, shows the nature of the conversation that we're going to have specifically on brand and product. Is like, it is a very subjective and sometimes ever changing paradigm, right? And so I'll use a quote from renowned author and entrepreneur Seth Godin. He says, "A brand is the set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that, taken together, account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another." He also defines a product thusly: "Don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers." And so I think what he's saying, and I think sort of speaks to the real nature of the debate, is the brand is, the extension of the sort of product itself, and has a kind of intangible, almost like emotional attachment for consumers, whereas the product itself is really just trying to solve a particular problem, right? And I think Godin sort of recognizes that in his two definitions, and so there's several other points of discussion that I'd like to bring up while we talk today, but yes, this is certainly one that I've been looking forward to. I'll first hand it over to Ashley to make her introductory remarks and see how she wants to frame her side. She will be taking a sort of brand first approach to it. And we're very excited to have her. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you for having me. Yeah, as Daniel mentioned, I'm the VP of Partnerships at Hawke Media, and we're, of course, a digital marketing agency and consultancy, so I would be remiss not to take up the mantle of the brand side of this debate this morning. Although I do acknowledge product is extremely important, from my point of view, I think brand is superior and needs to be the focus of anyone's go-to-market strategy and campaigns. And yeah, building on the Seth Godin quote, beyond being the expectations, memories, and stories, I would say the brand is sort of the face, it's the personality, it's the core values of your business. And I would say the number one false assumption that a lot of product developers or product marketers make is that the superior product or the best product always wins. And I could say definitively that we've seen, and there are so many case studies in this when it comes to go-to-market and marketing and advertising, that that's not necessarily the case. Maybe in an ideal world that would be true, but it isn't. And I would say that brand and marketing is more about storytelling. You take whatever product it is that you do have, and you create those emotions and you elicit those emotional responses. And, that's primarily what we do in advertising. You typically are drawing on one of 6 emotions in any campaign, and you're trying to tie it back to those memories or that feeling that people have when they think of your brand. So I think it's extremely important to create your brand story, and that can be just as powerful as your actual tactical advertising and marketing strategies. But you can't even really have a successful go-to-market or marketing or advertising strategy without first creating and telling that story of your brand and building it. And I would say that's also why in our industry, we talk more and more and more about lifestyle brands or lifestyle imagery. And, if you have done any analysis over the past few years of the way different campaigns are going and being developed, you'll notice more and more lifestyle imagery is being used instead of just product imagery, which oftentimes doesn't perform as well on a campaign level or even an ad set level. And the reason for that, again, is people like to picture the product in their home or in the real world. They don't just want to see the product on a white background. They want to see, where can they take that product? What can they do with that product? What interactions can they have with that product? So again, that's actually more about the brand and the lifestyle and the feeling. And so generally speaking, I personally think that people buy brands, they don't buy products. And another good example of this is even in the English language, when we talk about tissue, let's say, most people are going to say, can I please have a Kleenex? They're not going to say, give me a facial tissue, or may I please have a facial tissue? And the same thing goes with, let's say, chapstick. Right? Chapstick is the brand name. The item, the product is actually called chapstick or lip chap, but chapstick is the brand name. Kleenex is the brand name. So you're winning with your brand and your storytelling and creating utter dominance when it sort of starts to creep into the English language and the brand name becomes ubiquitous with the actual product or item itself. And I would say that's a very clear way that we see that with physical goods, especially consumables. But another example I would say in technology is when your brand name becomes a verb. So, I Googled it, or I Ubered here, or I snapped it to him. Once your brand name like Snapchat, Google, Uber becomes a verb in the English language, you've won. You've created that market dominance. Your brand is now an intrinsic part of everyday life. So again, just more ways in which I think brand sort of takes the cake. And then in addition to that, I would say, we've talked about the feelings that brands elicit, but there's also the sort of catchphrases or imagery or even their logo. So, there's probably very few people in the room right now, if I said, just do it, that wouldn't tie that back to Nike, right? And the way that just do it is about motivation and about climbing that hill or that mountain or like making that 8-minute mile, right? And so again, it's not about, oh, we have the best sneakers. Perhaps Adidas has the best sneakers. I don't know. It's not for me to say. But Nike arguably has the more iconic brand, the more iconic swoosh and the catchphrase, right? So I would say the brand can create the need for the product, and that's ultimately what sells it. Of course, it's important to have a good product, but I think the ultimate case study in this would be if you look back even at, again, another consumable example of an everyday item, toothpaste. 100 years ago, no one used toothpaste, right? It wasn't a common household item like it is today. Today, especially dentists will tell us we need to brush 1 to 3 times a day. Well, back in the day, no one was brushing their teeth. And until Pepsodent was invented, and then Claude C. Hopkins, the advertising exec, was approached about it. And there's actually a really great chapter in the book, Creating Habit, on this for anyone who's interested. But if you want to learn more about it, that's a great example. But basically, he was an advertising executive. He was approached by an old friend that had this new invention, this minty, frothy toothpaste, Pepsodent, and he wasn't getting anywhere. He had a great product. It was minty, it was fresh, it was frothy, it was foamy, it worked, it made you feel good, but he wasn't getting anywhere with market adoption until he approached his old pal, Mr. Hopkins, the advertising exec, and they created a story. And what did he do? He did some research. He learned about teeth. He learned about the environment in the mouth, and he discovered plaque. And of course, it's not his background. So as an advertising exec, he didn't know about plaque. He discovered plaque, and he saw one word in one, he said, very dry medical journal that talked about the film that develops on teeth. And so what did he do? He started to tell a story, and he made that film on teeth a problem. So he started to explain to people that they have the film on their teeth, and that this product, this is the solution. So he created a story around a problem. He framed a problem. He posed the Pepsodent at the toothpaste as a solution to that problem. And that was his way of telling a successful story and bringing that product to market. So, you know, and then of course it became habit forming, because now we all use toothpaste as sort of our daily routine or our sleep hygiene. And, you know, to create a habit, you have the trigger, you have the reward. And he purposely framed it as, oh, don't you want a beautiful smile? You want to get rid of that film. So obviously that's the reward. And although that might be true that toothpaste can give you a beautiful smile, perhaps it's more about hygiene or cleanliness versus beauty. But that was his way of telling the story to get people to buy this product and put it in their household and make it an everyday part of their lives. So I would say, again, that's sort of how brand wins out. And then the only other example I wanted to touch on quickly in my opening remarks would be, this also speaks to the entire concept that we have around luxury or designer goods, right? Just because it's a brand name item does not mean it's higher quality. Oftentimes, as we all know nowadays in the global world that we live in, sometimes the exact same purse or product or whatever it might be is literally being made in the exact same factory. The only difference might be the brand name, the label, the logo that's being stitched into it. And the brand name or designer is probably charging 3 to 5, maybe even 10x what the brandless or no-name product that is identical is being marketed and sold for. And again, at that point, what do you think is driving that higher rate, that higher cost? And it's not necessarily a superior product. It's not necessarily better quality leather. It's just that you're literally paying for the brand name. And what creates the brand name? The story that their team has put around the product that they're telling. So obviously I want to give you a chance, Nick, to jump in.
Outstanding. Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And so Nick, obviously going to give you an opportunity to respond to, you know, some of what Ashley, you know, put forth in her opening remarks. But first, we'd like to sort of get your, you know, introductory remarks and your framing of the topic as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Ashley, for that intro there. It was really interesting how you weaved in together, you know, the whole talk about brand and how that works with various examples. I really like the Pepsodent one, and you know, there's the story about just how one brand can charge, you know, 5x more for something that's produced in the exact same factory, exact same as somebody else, even though it's the same. So how can they do that? So part of that, I think is this culture of hype, and you know, I'll get into that a little bit, but I really want to talk about just how there are different types of companies and different types of products, of course. And so product-led companies, they rely on greatness. You know, their teams are aligned to this goal. I think about the whole D2C movement over the past decade. And so, you know, of course, Shopify is a big part of that with many of them. And so D2C can really do well, and it can survive on brand, but it cannot be a persistent thing that's going to carry them throughout the life of that company. They need to have the best product. And, you know, the best products for D2C is what they often focus on. You think about, you know, I think of some brands like The Sill with plants, or I think about mattresses like Casper, I think about Quip with toothbrushes, or I think about Away with luggage. You know, they're focused on a very limited group of very good products that are the best. And so that's what people know when they come to that brand. They can say, hey, I'm getting the best product here. And yeah, I'm going to get a great experience that's going to result out of that too. There's lots of great examples of other brands out there that have just created fantastic products. And, you know, you think about the whole Japanese method of Kaizen, which was initiated by Toyota many decades ago, and that constant improvement. And so you look at Toyota with that constant improvement innovation moving to build Lexus back in the late 80s. And I mean, that was a premium product, incredibly refined, better than any other cars that were out there at the time. I remember the Lexus, what was it, LS400, LS450, like just tremendous car, like smoother than any Mercedes, better driving. And that was product driven 100%. It was, you know, tackling everything that Mercedes was doing, everything that BMW was doing, everything that Audi, Rolls-Royce, all the others. But they said, look, we're going to take everything that they do well and we're going to make the best product out of it. And this is what's going to define what we do. And it's been a huge success story for them over the past 30 plus years. You know, you look at Shopify. I mean, like here we had Shopify was just, you know, for small businesses. Then we decided, hey, we're gonna form Shopify Plus about 8 years ago, and we're gonna add. First was just services layer, and then we're just adding on like new products and new products and new products, and very product driven. And I think if you were to talk to any engineer within the company, of which we're hiring about 2,000 this year, is to build product and to drive that. And so that's very centric, like to what we're doing and how we're looking at things. I think also, you know, to use another couple of like company examples, like larger ones, Ford just announced this week they have a new pickup truck called the Maverick. So the Maverick, it's a $20,000 pickup truck, which is phenomenal, and it's a hybrid as well, and it's going to get 40 miles per gallon in the city. That's a great product. They've been listening to their customers. You know, it's like what Seth Godin said, you're finding great products for your customers. Or you want to find products for your customers. You want to find great products for your customers. And so not everybody out there wants to have a Chevy Silverado or a Ford F-150, the biggest thing out there. They just want to haul a few things in the back of their truck at the weekend. And so the Maverick is designed to fit that and to keep within, you know, these whole fuel regulation and fuel economy needs that everybody is certainly feeling at the pump these days. I think about some bad examples of product that are out there, that things that have not gone well for companies over the last perhaps few years. Some immediate examples that came to mind for me were Juicero. You remember those guys? They had the juicer where it was like these pouches of juice, and it actually turned out that you could squeeze it with your hands and get a better effect than just chucking it in their machine, which was, you know, useless effectively. So that was a very brand driven approach that they had. And so much so that they were able to secure, I believe, over $100 million in funding. And yet the company collapsed because the product was useless. So another big example of a big failure on, and this is an ongoing one on a product level, is with Boeing and the 737 MAX. And so they decided to cut corners, and they decided that, you know, listen, we're going to go with the existing 737 airframe. You know, we're going to go with this kind of low and forward slung engine position, and we're going to fit in these new high efficiency turbofan engines. So they're much wider, but that's going to change things around. They decided, like, look, we can't do other things. Is it the cost effect? Like, we can't raise up the whole aircraft to have those new engines fit under there. We're going to just mount them a little differently. As a result, 2 airplanes crashed, killing hundreds of people. I mean, this is a huge, huge product failure. And Boeing to this day is facing that. And personally, I would not want to fly in a 737 MAX, no matter how safe they say it is with the new software on board. So product-led companies rely on greatness. You know, their internal teams are aligned to this. You know, if you look at personas of people, of just, you know, Ashley, yourself, Dan, myself, you know, I'd say that more personas are aligned to products, and more personas are aligned to the technical abilities of the products and like how they work. I think recently, this is a funny story where I had to get a new boiler for my house. I have baseboard heat in my old home here in Pennsylvania, and then the issue being, like, I needed to switch over from oil burning to natural gas. And so I was really interested in just the products that were out there. You know, these are very old school technologies. I mean, this is just a gas-fired hot water heat for my home. It's not rocket science, but I like to go into the things, understand the BTUs and all this stuff. And I spoke with 5 different companies, and out of those, you know, 4 of them, you know, one of them insulted me by saying, after I asked him a few technical questions, saying, do you want the Cadillac of heaters or do you want the Chevrolet? And I was like, I think I'm going to finish this discussion right now. Thank you very much. So I actually ended up going with an engineer who came from the next organization that spoke with me, and it was like, spoke to my level. He understood what I wanted in the product. He talked all the different features and capabilities. He answered all of my questions, very technical. It was like, perfect, 100%. Product led. That is what on my business. And so that's, I think, where a lot of personas are. Third is that, great products are really clearly tied to their mission. So the mission is often part of the product. Like the mission is how the company often will begin. I think to examples like 4Ocean, they've got fantastic, footwear and other products, but their whole mission is around plastic removal from the ocean. You buy a product and we're going to remove, several pounds of plastic from the ocean. That's not only going to go into building this, but we're just going to remove it and use it for other uses as well. So the story is really part of their product. It's part of what they do. We touched on sustainability earlier. That's a big part, like we talked about 4Ocean. I think about Nike in the example that you brought up, Ashley. So with Phil Knight and the team there, they started with product. They were without question, like brand is what drives them now and has driven them for many years. But they had to start with a great product. And so if we're talking about the topic here, like what drives who's on first or what drives which, product starts, brand continues, but product is always the underlying foundation to it. So getting back to Nike again, back in the beginning, that whole mission of them was that they were used by great runners, and they had great people that they were tied to through the University of Oregon. I think Steve Prefontaine and all the fantastic records that he set. So it's a cool thing to see, like when there's a good product out there, any number of others, Apple and their great product, you're thinking about Simon Sinek and what's your why, but it's ultimately product. Then finally, just to really say, yeah, product just comes first. Everything else is secondary, but love to talk through this a little bit more.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. Now I'll ask Ashley, if you'd like to respond to anything in particular to what Nick said, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
Yeah, I have
a few
comments on Nick's thoughts, and then I'm happy to bring up my first sort of points on the brand side as well. But yeah, for example, you used Apple as an example of a product-led company. Well, I don't disagree that Steve Jobs obviously was relentless in his pursuit of excellence and iterating on product, and that's not up for debate. That is very obvious. I would say that the area in which Apple excels was building their brand over time. And they sort of, even those commercials that we're all familiar with, the Mac versus the PC guy, right? And that was telling the story of like, oh, these nerdy losers use PCs and these cool hipsters use Mac or Apple products, right? And so yes, although I don't disagree being here on my beautiful new M1 today talking to you, that I believe and I agree with you that Apple has a superior product. They did a really big thing in telling that story and creating that lifestyle associated with who is a Mac user and what does a Mac or having a Mac afford you, not from its technical capabilities of what you can do with it and create with it, but also just like, who are you as a person and what community do you belong to? And that's even where it became sort of hipster and trendy to add these, usually startup or company stickers to the lid of your Mac, especially once you're in a room or you're in the Bay Area and back in the day and every table was covered with Apple devices, whose is whose, from whatever stickers they have on the front of it. So yes, they definitely were product led. I cannot argue with you there. Obviously, Apple is the best example probably of a product-led company, but inversely, Steve Jobs was also a master presenter. I mean, look at these massive keynotes that he used to do every year. And obviously Apple continues and carries on that tradition. And they create this hype about their product drops once a year. And even the leaks honestly build up and lead to more hype. So everyone's always thinking, oh, what features is the new iPhone going to have? Is the camera going to be bigger? Yes, there are inquiries and curiosity around the product and the product features. However, he's sort of driven that market demand based on the flair that was there in building the brand and creating that this is the lifestyle you have if you have an iPhone. And even what I think was very masterful of him is he actually built in the storytelling and the brand into the product. And a great example of that is actually Imessage. So as Apple users or iPhone users know, if you're texting someone who doesn't have an iPhone, you're SMS is actually going to show up in this puke green color versus this beautiful blue that occurs between two iPhones on iMessage. And when I say puke green, I'm actually not being hyperbolic at all. They actually intentionally put it a tinge of green that most resembles vomit to actually subliminally and subconsciously make people grossed out by even just seeing those little green message bubbles from an iPhone user to a non-iPhone user to an Android user, let's say. And that was a way that they built brand into their product, because the expectation was then, you know, a lot of Apple users don't really text people who don't have Apple products. So suddenly you're not even friends with people that don't also have an iPhone. They even created this sort of class system amongst cell phone users and the expectation there and the lifestyle. So it's very interesting actually how they've built brand even into a product-led company by Apple. So those were just some examples I wanted to mention there. And the other thing too is if we think back to the very first Macintosh commercial, the very iconic sort of 1989 dystopian world, George Orwellian sort of scene and smashing the screen. Again, they weren't just saying, oh, we have the best product. They were saying, this is the future. The future is now. And here we are. And you can travel to the future with this device. So it was a lot about the brand, building that brand and that storytelling. And even to this day, that's probably one of the most iconic ad campaigns we've seen for a technology company. So those were just some examples I wanted to mention. And the other thing I wanted to mention more broadly on something that you talked about when it comes to product, something that we see that is very ubiquitous nowadays with marketing are product drops, right? And so people get really excited and really hyped when a beloved brand that they love or follow or subscribe to is coming out with a new product, right? And I would argue, and it sounds counterintuitive because it's literally a product launch or a product drop. Part of the reason that hype is so successful is because of the brand story that they have built, the persona that they have reached and created about who owns or buys this product. Like let's say Supreme, right? Why do people line up around the block for, let's say, Supreme swag? It's because of the brand. You know, it could be a very basic white t-shirt or sweatshirt that in and of itself is not special, but it has that Supreme emblazoned across the front or the side or wherever it is these days. And that's the brand. That's even that designer it factor, that cool factor. That whole thing is the lifestyle and the story that a brand marketer has created so carefully and woven. And so even product drops, you could argue, aren't necessarily always solely about the product. Of course, I don't disagree with you that there might be certain segments that care a lot about the product, about the quality, about the features, about the fuel economy it affords them, like you mentioned. But there are those that care more about maybe having a Tesla because it's sexy, and Elon literally spelt out sexy with the S, the 3, the X, and the Y model cars, versus even, let's say, the greatest new Prius Prime, right? Because the Tesla arguably is a different class of car, luxury, or a different lifestyle. And I would say, again, you know, the Tesla isn't necessarily the better product. It might be, it might not be. I'm not here to pass judgment on that, but they've definitely created that brand and that persona and set those expectations. So those are the few things I wanted to mention to address some of the things you said. And then a few new points I'd like to bring into the discussion on the brand side. One, we obviously just went through this extremely unprecedented time with the pandemic. And I would say that's important to touch on in this discussion, because the number one thing that we started to see in that sort of situation is how important trust was for the consumer to trust you and your brand and your product. And especially when we start to see copycat products or items or counterfeits, and especially when it comes to, let's say, life-saving PPE, it's more important than ever to buy or purchase from a trusted brand, right? You haven't necessarily previously had to buy N95 masks, let's say, but are you gonna buy them from 3M, which is a known entity to you, or some random seller off Amazon? In a pinch, you might go for the random seller off Amazon, especially if there's no other option. But the average consumer would probably go with a trusted brand that they know, that's a leader in the space, that perhaps they also sort of associate with quality or a certain level of excellence in their product. But that's really where the trust comes to the forefront in a situation like that, like what we've all just gone through in this pandemic. So, and that's really led by the brand. And then that brings me to sort of consumer perception and also loyalty. So once a consumer trusts you, they're typically more likely to continue doing business with you. So again, a lot of that has to do with their overarching experience or perception of your brand, not just the actual product itself and how good or terrible it is. And I would also note that loyalty, one of the main things that drives loyalty, especially in this day and age, is the rise of reviews. Right? A lot of people before purchasing, especially from an unknown brand, will check the reviews. They might especially go and look at the 1-star reviews to try and see what the major issues were with the product. And I would say we also saw how this started in the pandemic last year. You know, the number one thing that people do, especially let's say for holiday shopping, Q4 is the biggest time of the year for consumers. Well, guess what? Holiday research and shopping started last year earlier than ever. They showed that people started doing their holiday shopping research in April last year. Now, of course, that might be an outlier because we were all cooped up at home. We were all in these lockdowns and what have you. So we had a little extra time on our hands. But people literally started their research half a year early for the holidays last year. And a lot of that has to do with these reviews and this perception of trust and loyalty and whether or not they can trust a brand. And so research and reviews are becoming an even bigger part of the consideration phase of the purchasing funnel on the consumer or customer journey. And so to one of your points that you mentioned, Nick, about impact or mission, I could not agree more. That's extremely important, especially in this day and age, is to have a product or company or business or brand that is aligned on their impact and their mission. But again, I would actually argue, yes, in some cases, the product itself is literally a solution. Like, let's say it's a reusable straw. Okay, I would agree with you there. The product itself is leading the mission-driven work. But in other cases, whether or not it's sustainable, like let's say a 10 Trees t-shirt, but the mission is built into the brand where they say, you buy one of our t-shirts, we plant 10 trees for you. So it's not necessarily designed into the brand, but it's into the product, but it's the brand story that they're telling. And I do think that that's more important than ever today because we're seeing what I call also the rise of sort of the conscientious consumer, especially when it comes to millennials and now centennials, I think are the ones really picking up and carrying this torch with sustainability.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. That's outstanding. Nick, your response?
Cool. Thanks, Ashley. You know, lots of great things to talking about. And I mean, the importance of trust that you brought up, really important. I think the one where you talked about Amazon, you know, just somebody going on and what face mask were they going to buy? Was it going to be the 3M one, or is it going to be, you know, this other off-brand, potentially knockoff, potentially even counterfeit? And that's a brand issue too, I think, with Amazon, because, you know, that's something that's well known and that they have not yet countered effectively. So finding counterfeit, you know, understanding what's real and what's not. You know, are you going to go to the 3M site? Probably that'd be the first place to go if they had them at that time. So the other interesting thing is thinking about just commodified products versus products that have unique characteristics, capabilities, things that are relatively new to the market, covering like a new area, something that hasn't been met before, i.e. like iPhone. So if you think about like how many of these lifestyle-led brands that are out there that, you know, actually we probably work with day in, day out at Shopify and at HawkeMedia, that's something that's one where they're looking at aspirational. But I think an important part of that whole discussion too is, and I think back to, I forget who was the bank robber back in the day. It's like, why do you rob banks? It's because that's where the money is. And I mean, that's where a lot of these products tend to be centered, is around often like this luxurious, aspirational lifestyle, you know, jet setting, traveling, doing amazing things. And, you know, you'll see things, of course, you know, everything on social media tends to be geared towards that, you know, product drops. You talked about Supreme being very brand led, and you know, of course, there's tons of knockoffs from Supreme as well. And there's actually some really good talk about them. There's a recent book just came out called Hype. I really like that one. So lots of good things to talk about Supreme. I won't get into that one, but, you know, I think about just like also just how products could meet more in the middle for masses and for the masses, and for those, you know, not necessarily of the means, or for those folks that where the money is, you know, what about for others? What can be done there? I think about like how much, because we have such a brand focus with so much these days, and that leads that consumers, and because it's like, well, I want to have this way of life, but you know, this is what I really need. So I look at housing. I mean, shoot, like here in Philly where I am, like housing is just bonkers, as it is in most places. And in my little like post-industrial town where we used to have a carpet factory and a steel mill down the road that were our main sources of employment decades ago. And of course, they're long gone. But now the housing prices have just gone through the roof, and then all the infill that's happening. So the old stuff that's being torn down and new homes that are going in are completely out of character with the neighborhood. They are luxury dwellings. They're marketed as luxury aspirational dwellings. There's nothing about really Bridgeport, the town that I live itself. Like there's nothing about that. It's more like, hey, we have this proximity to Philadelphia and the activities that are there. We have this proximity to these activities on the riverfront. We have this proximity to the King of Prussia Mall, the largest mall on the East Coast. There's little about like, hey, you know, it's a great little neighborhood. You can go to this cool little restaurant and stuff like that. And then to get into the inside, you know, look at all of our luxury furnishings and wonderful things. And they're at a price point that, of course, is very luxurious too. Nothing at all that would, you know, fit in with like the people that currently live in the area. So it's something thinking about like that is what, if we get away from product guidance and we get into brand guidance, is that guiding us in the wrong way? Like ultimately it seems like the right thing, but is it the right thing? So I think about that, and I think about, you know, just to bring in a car example again, like the whole luxury led thing with Apple, and like all the cars nowadays, they're black, they're white, they're silver, and there's nothing else, much to the chagrin of my young daughters who would love to see a pink and purple car. There are no pink and purple cars anywhere. You can't get a purple car anywhere. I think maybe Chrysler's from 20 years ago, you'd be lucky to get a minivan like that. So yeah, really interesting stuff. I mean, one last thing I'll maybe add is around just the feelings for things. Like I think some industries really try to do this, but they're disingenuous, or maybe it's more because it's commoditized. I think about banking. Like look at banking. Like they'll pay a little bit of lip service, like, hey, we're here to support your goals, and then they'll show pictures of people having a lovely new home or doing other like great things with the money they just got. But in reality, people can go anywhere and get the money. They're just going to get it at the right rate that's going to make sense for them. So ultimately, I think that brand message that they have there probably falls flat, because it's something that anybody can go somewhere else or switch very readily to somewhere else, and they're not going to go with it. Versus, you know, a shoe brand like Nike, versus, you know, a tech brand, software brand, you know, versus like any number of these D2C brands. Like people are much more tied into the mission, especially just like around sustainability or things that really care. They really care about.
Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, I think it was Henry Ford who said that people can have a car in any color they want as long as it's black.
Right. Right.
And to share, as Elon Musk came up, we'll read a quote from him. He said, "Brand is just a perception that will match reality over time. Brand is simply a collective impression some have about a product." And I think coming from a guy who's failed as many times as he has in very public and glorious fashion, yeah, I think that sort of you know, says a lot about how he approaches it, right? That you know, you can iterate on both product and brand, and it's really ultimately in the manner in which you do it. You know, I think that if, you know, you sort of take his approach and be incredibly public and transparent, you know, with both your failures and successes, then maybe you can sort of take the Musk approach and sort of develop both, you know, simultaneously. I'd like to thank the two of you, you know, for a really, you know, engaging and just an excellent conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to both of you, and thank you so much for joining. I'm sure the audience, you know, greatly benefited and enjoyed it as well. So to Ashley and to Nick, both of you, thank you so very much.